It is generally agreed in Nettlemore that the whole thing began the night Hallvard Callow said no. This is not true. It began years earlier, on an ordinary morning, when somebody decided that a girl with no scent could not possibly be wanted, and said so near enough to her that she believed it. That version does not fit on a feast day. So the pack keeps the other one. Ylva had not meant to stand at the right that year. She had stood twice already, at 19 and at 20, and both times the line had moved past her, the way water moves past a stone. This year, Yvain found her in the drawing room. "You will stand," the head healer said, in the voice she used for setting bones. "I did not raise you to hide in a store cupboard." So she stood. The unclaimed were arranged along the east wall like jars on a shelf, 9 of them. Ylva was the tallest and the oldest by 4 years, and had scrubbed her hands twice to get the Tasher room out of them, which was a joke, because she had no scent at all and never had. Every wolf in that hall carried something in the air around them, smoke or cut grass or rain on hot stone, and when a wolf found the scent that went through them like a hook, that was the bond. Ylva carried nothing. Her wolf had never surfaced in 23 years, and when others stood near her, they described the sensation tactfully as standing beside an empty chair. The pack filed past. Old Tommen nodded at her, the way he nodded at furniture. Ylva looked at the far wall and counted the stones in it, which was a thing she had taught herself at 19 and had never been able to unteach. Then Halvard Callow's mother came down the line. Toyra stopped in front of her and took her hand in both of hers and said, loudly enough for the 4 nearest families, "You poor brave girl standing again. I said to Halvard only this morning, there is not a kinder heart in this pack, and it is a cruelty of the gods that she was made the way she was. But you understand, my dear, a house like ours has to think of the pups." She patted Ylva's hand twice and moved along. The hall did not go quiet. That was the part Ylva could never explain afterwards. Nobody gasped, there was only a soft settling sound, the sound of a room agreeing with something. Ylva walked out. She got as far as the back steps, where the lamps did not reach, and sat down and worked on breathing. "They are still going," said a voice. "You are not missing much." A man sat 3 steps down in the dark, a sheaf of papers across his knees, waited with a stone out of the flower bed. He did not turn round. "You are the clerk," Ylva said. "From Kelvarn. I am something like a clerk." "Then, put a thing in your book for me." She had not planned to say it. It came up out of her the way blood comes out of a wound. The charity rolls. Every quarter, the crown sends grain and cloth and medicine to the pack halls. It is written down in Kelvarn, and written down again at Rowan Hall, and I am the one who writes it, and the 2 numbers have not matched once in 4 years. 40 bolts of wool leave the capital. 12 reach the hall. Twice I have written to the seneschal, and twice been thanked for my diligence, and told it is a fault of the roads, and you do not think it is the roads. I think roads do not steal only the useful things, and leave the salt. He was quiet a moment. "Who reads what you write?" "Nobody reads what I write." She laughed. "And it came out wrong. That is rather the point of me. That seems a waste. It is the arrangement." She pulled her sleeves over her wrists. "I have no scent. I was rejected at my claiming 4 years ago by a man who is in that hall eating a very good pie. And tonight his mother explained to a third of the pack that I am a cruelty of the gods. Nobody is owed wanting. That is simply what I am, and I would take it as a kindness if you did not tell me it gets better." I was not going to. "Good. I was going to ask whether you keep your own copies of the ledgers, not the hall's book, yours." Ylva stopped. "I keep a rough book in my own shorthand because it is faster when the wagons come in, and I have to write in the yard." She frowned at the back of his head. "That is a strange question for a clerk." The hall door opened and threw a bar of yellow light down the steps. A big man in a grey cloak came out, looked at the man on the 3rd stair and said, "Your Majesty, the Marshal is asking for you." Ylva did not move. The man with the papers sighed. in the manner of somebody whose evening has become more complicated, and gathered them, and stood, and turned round, and Ilva found she was looking up at the Alpha King of High March. She knew the face from the coin. The coin had got the jaw, and made a hash of the rest. It had missed the way he stood, unhurried, as though rooms waited for him because they always had, and that the eyes were a pale winter grey, and much too watchful for the easy set of the rest of him. Somewhere under her ribs, a thing she did not have gave a slow turn. "Osric," he said, "since we are being direct." Her legs got her upright, without asking. "I have just told the king of all High March that his roads are thieves." "You have." "I called myself a cruelty of the gods." "That was the other woman. You called yourself an arrangement, which was worse, and I would like to come back to it." The door opened again. The rite was ending, and 40 faces turned up out of the dark to find their king on the stair with the scentless girl from the healing house. Dilva watched the pity arrive, and thought, with a weariness that went to the floor of her, that they had found a new way to do it. "Your Majesty," Koira Callow came down through the crowd with her hands already out. "Forgive her. She is not herself tonight. It has been a trying evening for the poor creature." And Ilva, who had spent 4 years being nothing whatsoever, heard herself say, quite clearly, "I am precisely myself. I have never once been anything else. It is the rest of you who cannot manage it." The steps went silent. She felt the mistake land in her stomach before it finished leaving her mouth. Koira had gone white to the lips. Osric looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped down beside her, turned to face the pack of Nettlemore, and said without raising his voice at all, "Then let it be witnessed, Osric," said the man in the grey cloak very quietly. "I take Ilva of Rowan Hall to wife. Here before her pack, in the sight of every one of you. Say it back to me, so there is no confusion later." Nobody said anything. "Brannock," Osric said pleasantly. The big man closed his eyes briefly, in the manner of a soldier who has learned that objecting is a poor use of breath. "Witnessed, witnessed," said the Marshal of Nettlemore, sounding as though somebody had hit him. And then, the rest, ragged and appalled, and one after another. All down the steps and out across the wet grass. "Witnessed, witnessed, witnessed." Because a king's word given before his people is the one thing in High March that cannot afterwards be taken back, and every wolf there knew it. He was already moving. She caught the edge of his sleeve at the bottom of the stair, which was a thing you could be hanged for, and did not care in the slightest. "Why?" she said. Osric stopped. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve and then at her face, and for half a heartbeat, something moved behind the winter grey. That was not amusement at all. "Bring the rough book," he said. And then he was gone into the dark, and the pack closed around her, and Ilva stood in her good grey dress with her question still open in her mouth and nowhere on earth to put it. She did not sleep. She lay in the healer's loft, with her boots on, and went through the evening, again and again, looking for the place where it could have gone differently, and could not find one. Married? To the Alpha King of High March. Witnessed by 400 people, half of whom had spent that same evening being told she was a cruelty of the gods. Near dawn, she lit a candle and took the rough book down. A fat, ugly thing bound in sacking, 4 years of wagon days in a shorthand. Nobody but Ilva could read. Bring the rough book. He had asked about the ledgers before he had ever looked at her face. That was what kept coming back. The only question he had asked her twice was about a book of numbers she had told him nobody read. "I have made a very great fool of myself," she said to the candle. The candle had no opinion. By morning, the whole of Nettlemore had one. Rena reached her first, up the loft ladder, with a bowl of porridge and an expression of such restraint that Ilva knew the news had reached the far barns before dawn. "You told Koira Callow. She cannot manage being herself." In front of the Marshal, then her face did something complicated and went out. "And then, the king married you. Nobody knows what it means. That is what they are all saying downstairs, not whether it is good or bad. They cannot work out what it is for. And there it was, laid out plain by a girl of 19 with porridge on her sleeve. Not why me, what is it for? There were kind explanations, and Ilva examined each, the way she examined a wound, and each came apart in her hands. That he had been moved to pity. Kings did not marry out of pity. They gave alms and rode home. That he had taken a fancy to her, in the dark, that there had been a bond and she had no scent, so there had been nothing to strike him, which left the book. She had assumed the worst of the morning would be the staring, and nobody stared at all. In the yard Halvard Callow was waiting by the water butt, with 4 years of nothing at all in his face, and he said, "Ilva, you are looking well," and she walked past him and felt, for one clean and shameful second, wonderful. By noon, the pity was gone, every scrap of it. 4 years of soft, crumpled mouths, burned off in a morning like frost. What replaced it was worse. Nobody in Nettlemore was sorry for her anymore. They were watching her, working out what she had become, and what it might cost them. And Ilva, who had been invisible so long, she had stopped noticing the weight of it, found she could not stand up under the weight of being seen. She found Yvonne in the tincture room, shut the door, and finally let go. "I do not understand what has happened to me." Yvonne set down the pestle. She was 60, and small and dry as a stick, and she had pulled Ilva out of a burned hold at the age of 2, and had never in 21 years told her she was pretty or clever or wanted. She had told her she was useful, and Ilva had held on to that with both hands. "Come here," Ilva went, and put her face down on the old woman's shoulder, and shook. "There now." The hand went over her hair, rough and steady, the way it had gone through fevers and through the year she was 19. "Whatever they are saying in that yard, you are not a fool. He asked about my ledgers before he asked my name twice. Why would the Alpha King of Highmark care about a rough book from a healing house? Perhaps it is easier for a young king to look at a book than at a girl he has married in front of 400 people. Men do that." She took Ilva's chin and turned her face up, and her eyes were wet, which Ilva had never in her life seen. "You are to be careful, in Kelvarn. They will smile at you, and take what is useful and set you down again, and I will not have it. I did not spend 20 years keeping you whole to watch that happen. You are frightening me." "Good." Frightened girls check their doors. She went back to the pestle. Dilva stood in the warm, bitter dark and felt steadier than she had in a day and a night, because whatever else the world was doing, there was one person in it who had never wanted anything from her. The bell over the gate began to ring. It was the middle of the afternoon on an ordinary Thursday. The gate bell was rung for wagons at dawn, and for danger at any hour, and it was not dawn, and there was no smoke. Yvonne had gone very still, with the pestle in her hand. "That is not a wagon," Ilva said. No. Half of Rowan Hall was in the yard already. A rider was coming up the Nettlemore Road at a walk, in crown grey, unhurried, with the low sun behind him. Nobody was ready. That was the thing Ilva would remember. There was bark half ground on the table, and a smear of tincture on her cuff, and she had assumed, without ever examining the assumption, that a thing decided on a staircase in the dark would take weeks to arrive. The rider stopped in the gateway and looked around the yard until he found her. "Lady," said Brannock, "you are wanted at Kelvarn tonight." The room they gave her at Kelvarn had a bed in it the size of the healer's loft, and Ilva sat on the edge of it in her traveling clothes without touching anything, the rough book on her knees, like a woman waiting to be told what she was charged with. Nobody came. She waited. She was good at waiting. She had waited on a wall at 19 and 3 years for a seneschal to answer a letter, and thought, turning the book over in her hands, that she had perhaps built an entire life out of it. In the morning they took her to a small room off the council chamber with a table, 2 chairs and no window. Osric was already in it. There was a document on the table, and Ilva understood the whole situation before anybody had said a word. "Ah," she said. "It is a contract. It is. Sit down, please. You have been standing since Nettlemore, and it is beginning to wear on me. She sat. By daylight, he looked gray under the eyes. A man who had been up all night with something. I am going to be direct, Osric said, because I do not think you have much patience left for the other thing. None whatever. Good. He turned the document to face her. A marriage settlement. We are married in law and in the sight of the pack, and neither of us can undo it. You will live at Kelvarn as my wife for 1 year. At the end of it, if you wish to go, you go, with an income for life, and I will make no claim upon you. The marriage need not be consummated and will not be unless you ask. The crown will settle a healing house upon you, wherever you care to put it. She read it twice. It said all of that, in language even a ledger keeper could follow. And in exchange, you will do the work of a queen, which is largely listening to people and remembering what they said. You will be seen with me, he paused, and you will let me read your rough book. There it was, out on a table. Say the rest of it, Ylva said. I am not sure what you mean. You are a very good liar, I expect. In the ordinary way. You are doing it badly this morning because you are tired. She put her finger on the page. You married me on a staircase, 20 minutes after learning that I keep a private record of 4 years of crown goods going missing. And now you offer me a contract that asks almost nothing and mentions the book last, as though it were an afterthought. Nothing is last on that list by accident. Osric sat back. You are going to be a great deal of trouble, he said, and sounded pleased about it, which she did not know what to do with. Was it the book? Yes. The word landed cleanly. She had expected it to hurt more, and understood a moment later that it had arrived somewhere already braced. Then why marry me? You could have taken it off me in the yard. You could have had Brannock lifted out of my hands and ridden away, and I could not have said one word to anybody. Yes. So why? Because a book with no keeper is a book anyone can call a forgery. The shorthand is yours, and the moment I take it out of your hands, you become a girl in a healing house 4 days' ride away, who knows something inconvenient. He said the next part very evenly. And people who know inconvenient things about this business have been dying. The room was quiet. How many? Ylva said. That is not on the contract. How many? 3. A seneschal's clerk who wrote a memorandum. A wagon master out of Coldreach. A woman in the counting house who asked her supervisor the same question you asked your seneschal, in almost the same words. All 3 deaths were accidents. 2 were even convincing. Ylva looked down at the book in her lap and thought about writing letters, twice, and being thanked for her diligence. You did not marry me to have the book, she said slowly. You married me so that having it stopped being fatal. A wife of the royal house is the hardest thing in High March to arrange an accident for. He turned his cup a quarter turn. It was the fastest protection I had, and I had 4 minutes to use it. You were being sold to that pack as a tragedy. I could see a use for you, and I took it in front of witnesses, before anybody could think of a reason to stop me. That is the ugliest offer anyone has ever made me. It is the honest one. Yes, Ylva said. That is why it is the ugliest. She picked up the pen. She would think about this moment often afterwards, and could never make it sound sensible to anybody. Because the sensible thing would have been to argue or to weep, or to ask for a day. What she had been handed was the first offer anyone had ever made her that did not come wrapped in kindness. She was expected to be grateful for. She signed, Ylva of Rowan Hall, in her small square hand. Osric let out a breath. I have conditions, of course. You do. The Hall's requisitions for the last 4 years, and the Crown's copies, in a room with a door that shuts. I want to be told when you are lying. Not what the lie is. Only that there is one, so I am not made a fool of twice in a week. And I want Yvonne written into the settlement. An income and the headship of Rowan Hall for life. Whatever becomes of me. Done. Done and done. He reached for the pen. The last one I would have offered. The last one is the only one I would have signed for. She watched him sign, and read the page over one final time. out of pure habit, the way she read every page that crossed her table, and that was how she found it. At the foot of the second sheet, below the place where both their names now sat, there was a further paragraph. It had been written in a different hand, smaller and older, and a plain wax seal had been set across the whole of it, so that the words underneath could not be read. What is this? Osric did not look up. That is not part of your settlement. It is on my settlement. It is a crown clause. It is on every document that leaves this room. He was gathering the papers, and his voice had not changed at all, and that was precisely the trouble, because for the whole of the last hour it had been changing constantly, and now it was smooth as water. It is procedural. You do not need to read it. You have just told me I may ask when you are lying. He stopped. For a long moment the King of all Highmarch stood with her marriage settlement in his hands and did not answer her, and Ylva watched him decide something and watched him decide not to say it. Yes, Osric said at last. There is one. The room with a door that shuts turned out to be a disused muniment office under the west stair, and by the fourth day it had swallowed her whole. Ylva laid the requisitions out along a trestle in the order the wagons had gone out, and began for the first time to see the shape of the thing she had been writing down. It was not theft at the roadside, which was what she had always assumed. What she found instead was a column on every crown requisition, headed as wastage allowance. Explain it to me as though I were stupid, Osric said from the doorway. He had taken to coming down at the end of the day, never announcing himself and never staying long. You are not stupid. You are busy, which is worse, because busy men sign things. She turned the sheet round. Every consignment that leaves Kelvarn is allowed a portion for spoilage. Grain gets wet, cloth gets mildewed. On the Crown's copy, the allowance is 1 part in 20. That seems reasonable. It is. And this is the same consignment written up at the depot, at Coldreach, where it is broken and reloaded. She set the second sheet beside it. 1 part in 5. Osric came the rest of the way into the room. Somebody raises the allowance at the halfway house, Ylva said. The goods are recorded as spoiled and struck off, and the Crown has already agreed in principle that spoilage happens, so nobody upstream asks. It is not stealing. On paper, it is weather. And it has never once been queried, because the only 2 people who could are the seneschal, who is sent a summary, and the hall-keeper, who is sent nothing at all. He pulled out the other chair, sat down, and said, "Show me the rest." She had expected him to hand the finding to men with better paper. Instead, he came back the next evening, and the one after, asking questions of a specificity that told her he had been thinking about it between times. You will want the Coldreach names, she said on the 9th evening. 2 clerks, a master of stores, and above them a factor who countersigns for a house rather than for the Crown. Callow. Osric did not react at all, which was itself a reaction, and she filed it. The court had meanwhile settled on its own version of her at 3 dinners. Running some perfectly pleasant woman had asked after her health in a tone of such delicate concern that Ylva had wanted to put her fork through the table. You may as well know what you have married, she said to him, late, on the 12th night. I have no scent and no wolf, and I never will. I cannot be bonded to. I cannot give you a claiming ceremony, or a mating mark, or any of the things your court is waiting for, and, by the spring, somebody will say out loud that the king married a woman who is not properly a wolf at all. Osric put down the sheet he was holding. Have you finished? Very nearly. I am also plain and taller than most men find comfortable, and I have hands like a saddler. Now, have you finished? Yes. Good, because I have no answer ready, and I am not going to invent one to soothe you. He turned to face her properly. I inherited a treasury I do not understand, a court I did not choose, and a war I stopped by giving away 2 valleys I had no right to give. Every man in that chamber has been doing this longer than I have, and knows it. I have never in my life run a storeroom. You are the king. Yes. Which is exactly why nobody has ever told me a true thing about how the kingdom works. He said it without any self-pity, which was somehow worse. You found in 9 days what my treasury has not found in 4 years, and you did it in a cupboard under a staircase. Ilva had nothing whatever to say. So no. I will not tell you that you are handsome, because you would not believe me, and we would both have a horrible evening. He picked the sheet up again. Teach me the storeroom? She got up, because she could not sit still, and he came and stood beside her, and for an hour they went through it, line by line, with their heads bent over the same page. She was aware of him, and disliked it very much. She had spent 4 years as an empty chair and had not understood until that hour that the reason nobody stood near her was that there was nothing there to stand near. Stop me, she said. This one is signed by the hall. Which hall? Mine, Rowan Hall. She frowned. That is not right. The hall does not countersign at the depot. We sign on receipt in the yard. She held it to the candle, a small neat hand, the ink faded brown. They did it differently before my time, set it aside, Osric said. She set it aside, and forgot it entirely, and it lay on the corner of the trestle under a candle stub for the rest of the winter. Right, he said. There is a thing I have been putting off because I knew you would argue. He took something from his coat and put it on the table, a seal, crown gray, a handspan across, and beside it, a folded warrant with the wax already on it. What is that? It is you, warrant of the crown over stores. Any requisition anywhere in High March may be stopped by your hand alone, and no man may countersign past you. Not the seneschal, not the treasury. Not me, unless I do it in council with my reasons. Written down. Ilva looked at it and did not touch it. You cannot give that to me. I have. It was witnessed this afternoon. I am a hall-keeper. You were a hall-keeper, Osric said. For 4 years, you watched a thing happen and had no authority to stop it. And you wrote letters into the dark and nobody read them. So, he shrugged. And something in it was almost shy. Now, you have the authority. Go and stop it. She picked up the seal. It was heavier than it looked, and warm from his coat. You understand the first requisition, I stop, will be a callow one. Yes, and that they will come for you over it. Osric smiled for the first time in 12 days. They already have. She used it 9 days later. She had found 4 consignments she could not account for, and said in council that paper had done all it could, and somebody would have to go and look at the depot. The seneschal explained why that was impossible. Ilva put the crown seal on the table and let it sit there, and the seneschal discovered a way. They came down into the pass on the second afternoon of the ride north, where the road narrowed between a scree slope and a stand of black pine, and there were 4 men on the verge, with a cart and a horse standing lame. Brannock raised a hand and the column slowed. It was the most ordinary thing on any road in High March, and one of the men had already come out into the road with his hat off. And Ilva looked at him, and felt the whole afternoon go wrong. His hands. She had held 500 pairs of hands in 4 years. She knew what a carter's hands were. The callus across the base of the fingers from the rain, the split thumbnail, the ground in black. This man's were clean and soft, with a shine of new blister across both palms, the kind you get in 3 days of doing something your body has never done. Osric, she said. He was already turning towards her, because she had used his name and not his title, and that was the only reason the first bolt took him in the shoulder of his coat instead of the base of his throat. After that it was noise. Ilva was on the ground, without knowing how, half under a horse going up and sideways, and there was a man coming round the cart with a blade low, and Brannock 10 feet away, with his back turned. She got her hands on the cart shaft and heaved it into the road in front of him, and he went over hard. Somebody else came past her fast, and there was a line of white heat across her forearm, and she looked down and thought, quite calmly, that will need cleaning. Then it was over. 2 of them were down, and the other 2 had gone up the scree, in a way that was not panic at all, one whistle between them and no shouting. Somewhere below, a bird started up again, which struck Ilva as outrageous. "Sit," Brannock said. "Lady, sit down." She sat on the verge and talked Brannock through cleaning the cut, because he was doing it wrong, and she could not do it left-handed. "Look at the one by the cart," she said, teeth chattering. "Look at his hands, and tell me whether he has ever driven anything in his life." Brannock went and looked and came back, and said nothing, which was answer enough. Osric knelt in the road in front of her. There was a tear through the shoulder of his coat and a graze under it, and his face was perfectly composed. "You are not surprised," Ilva said. "I beg your pardon? You have a hole in your coat, and you have not once looked at the tree line. You have not asked who they were. You have not asked why. Brannock put 4 men on the ridge before he did anything else, which is not a thing you do the first time, or the second." Osric said nothing. "How many times," Ilva said, "has this happened?" He reached out and turned her wrist over to look at the cut, and his fingers were very careful. And he did not answer her at all. Winter came down over Kelvarn, and Ilva stopped counting the days until the year was up. The work had grown teeth. 2 depots stopped. A master of stores at Coldreach taken up and questioned and released for want of anything that would stand. 3 consignments turned back at the gate on her warrant, and the noise from the houses afterwards, and the discovery that she enjoyed the noise. And the king came down every evening. He came with papers he did not need her to read, and a plate from his own dinner when she had missed hers. He came one night and sat on the edge of the trestle, with his coat off and his sleeves turned back, and Ilva lost the thread of a sentence, because his forearms were right there and the lamplight was doing something unforgivable to them. "You stopped," Osric said. "I am thinking." She was not thinking. He never gave her anything. That was the maddening part. She would ask a real question, about Coldreach, about the men in the pass, and he would go sideways so smoothly that she would be 3 subjects away before she noticed the turn. "Who benefits if you die?" she asked him once, plainly. "You have ink on your chin," he said, and took it off with his thumb, and she forgot the entire question for 2 days and was furious with herself when it came back. She had begun keeping a list of the things he had slid out of, in shorthand, at the back of the rough book, and the list was getting long. But the list was not what kept her awake. She lay in the great absurd bed and thought about his hands turning her wrist over on the Coldreach road, and was disgusted with herself, because there was no bond. There could be no bond, and a woman with no scent who lets herself want a man is queuing up to be told no in front of a room full of people. It broke in the 9th week. He came in late, and did not bring papers, and sat down on the bench across from her, and said nothing, and after a while, she put her pen down. "What do you want?" It came out raw, and she let it. "You come here every night, you do not tell me one true thing about the men on that road, and you sit there looking at me, as though what?" "Do not." Her hands were not steady. "You have known for weeks. I am not built for this. I have had 4 years of learning exactly what I am, and I made my peace with it, and you are undoing it every night at the 11th bell, without ever once saying what you mean, and I cannot. I would rather you were cruel to me than kind at me." Osric stood up. He came round the trestle slowly. "The way you come round a table, towards something that might bolt. What if I want you? Men do not want women like me. Then I am something else." He was close now, close enough that she had to tip her head back. "You do not believe me. So tell me to go and I will go tonight, and never trouble you again, or ask me to prove it." The room was very quiet. Her pulse was very loud. "Prove it," Ilva said. He kissed her, and every careful thing she had built for 4 years went white and silent at once. His hand slid into her hair, and his mouth was warm and certain and unhurried, and there was no audience for it, and that was the thing that undid her. There was only the lamp, and the cold room, and the enormous fact of him. She had no scent to give him, no signature, no hook, none of the machinery. Every other wolf in High March had been handed at birth, and he had crossed the room anyway, on nothing but the sight of her. She heard him make a sound against her mouth, and understood with a shock that she was the cause of it, that a man could be moved by her. "Ilva," he said, ragged, against her jaw. She had been useful her whole life. She had been thanked and pitied and set aside, and every good thing that had come to her had come because she was of use to somebody. She had been valued the way a good knife is valued. Nobody had ever wanted her for no reason, and there was no reason in this at all, and that was the thing that broke her open. "I am sure," she said. He lifted her onto the trestle among 4 years of other people's ledgers, and the papers went off the end of it, and the lamp burned down to nothing while the snow came on outside. Afterwards she lay against his chest and felt something she had never felt in her life, which was the absence of the question of whether she ought to be there. "You are thinking," he said into her hair. "I am wondering what happens in the spring." His arm tightened. "Ask me something easier." "That is not an answer." "No," Osric agreed. "It is not." And Ilva lay in the dark of the muniment room with her cheek on the King of Highmarch and thought, with the small, cold part of her that never stopped working, that she had just been given the softest turn away he had ever done. The midwinter feast was the first time the whole court saw them together, and Ilva got through 4 hours of it on a single fact, which was that she had stood at the east wall of a meeting hall for 3 years running, and there was nothing this room could do to her that had not already been done by better people in worse shoes. She wore dark green. The northern envoy, a broad, quiet man named Aldius, who had ridden 9 days to put his name on a treaty, told her his own wife kept the accounts at home and had once caught a bishop, and Ilva liked him immediately. Osric found her on the gallery an hour before midnight. "You are hiding. I am observing. It is a different thing with better light." He came and stood at the rail. Below them the hall turned and glittered and roared, and up here there was only the cold off the glass and the smell of tallow. "You hate it," Ilva said. "Hate is strong. You have smiled at 11 people tonight, and meant it at 2. I have counted." She turned to look at him. "I keep books. It is a disease." Osric laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and then it went out of his face and left something underneath that she had never been shown. "I was 24, he said. "My father went out on a Tuesday and did not come back, and there was an actual afternoon, when a dozen men stood in a room deciding whether I would do, and I stood in the middle of it working extremely hard on my face. I have been working on it ever since. It is the only thing I have ever been genuinely good at, and I cannot decide whether that makes me a king or a very tired liar with a nice jaw. Osric, ignore me. It is the wine and the hour. You have had 1 cup, and you have not drunk it." He looked at her, and she reached up and put her hand along the side of his face, which she had never once done where anyone might see, and watched the performance come off him like a coat. "You are not what they think you are," Ilva said. "I have read 4 years of what this kingdom does when nobody is watching, and I have read what you do, and they are not the same. Whoever those men thought they were choosing, they got somebody better and have still not noticed." Something cracked open behind the winter gray. "Ilva," he said low and kissed her, and the world came apart. It came in through the place where they touched. Warmth and terror and a longing so raw it was barely bearable, and it was not hers. She could feel the shape of what he felt, distinct and clear and utterly foreign, pouring into her like water into a dry channel. And underneath that, impossible, there was something in the air between them. Him, she could smell him. Cold stone and green wood and something beneath it that went through her like a hook, and she had never smelled anything in her life. Not once, and her own wolf turned over under her ribs and stood up. Ilva jerked back with a gasp. Osric's pupils had blown wide, and his nostrils flared, and he said, in a voice she did not recognize, "Ilva, I can smell you. No, salt and rain and something like bruised mint. I do not have the words." He took a step towards her and his hand was shaking. "Ilva, that is a bond. I can feel you. How is that? It is the room. she said. He stopped. It is the crowd and the tallow and 400 wolves in one hall. Her own voice was coming from a long way off, because if it was real, then something else was true, and the something else was so large that her mind refused to walk towards it. I have no scent. I have 23 years of every wolf in Nettlemore, telling me what I am not, and I am not going to stand on a gallery and be told they were all wrong, because a man kissed me at midwinter. She watched him go careful, the way he went careful with dukes and frightened councilmen, and she had not had that voice used on her in months. Of course, Osric said quietly. You are right. Probably nothing. He let her go. That was the thing she could not forgive herself for afterwards. He let her go because she had asked him to, and never once said the true thing, which was that he already knew what it meant. She went back to her rooms and found a small parcel on the table. Straw-packed, sealed with candle wax, addressed in a small, neat hand she had known since she was 2 years old. The jar inside was the one that came every month and had come every month of her life. Bitter, dark, 3 spoons at the turn of the moon. Yevon had started her on it at 5 years old for a weakness of the blood, and Ylva had never once in her life thought about it for longer than it took to swallow. There was a note. My girl, you will have run out. Do not neglect it, however grand you have become. Why? Ylva smiled for the first time in an hour, and took 3 spoons and went to bed. Within 3 days she could not smell anything at all, and was so relieved that she did not stop to wonder why relief was the feeling. The treaty took 11 days. Aldous was a careful man, and Osric a careful king, and they went through it, clause by clause, while Ylva sat at the end of the table and said nothing and understood, somewhere around the 4th day, that she was there because he wanted her there. On the 9th day the king's shoulder went bad on him. It was the old Greys from the Cold Reach Road, gone angry with the cold, and the palace physician made up a draught and sent it along, and Ylva took the cup off the tray in the passage because it saved a servant the stairs. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, without meaning to. The sediment was wrong. Willow bark does not throw gray. Willow throws a pale brown fur. This had settled hard and fine, with a faint blue cast where the lamp caught it, and there was exactly one root in high marks that did that. And you did not put it within 9 feet of an alpha. Who carried it? She said. The servant did not know. Nobody ever knew. It had come up from the still room on a tray, with 4 other things, and any hand in the palace could have passed over it in a corridor. She carried it into the council room in front of the envoy, and set it down at the king's elbow and said, Do not drink that. And then, to the room, I want the still room closed, and nothing in it touched. Osric looked at the cup for a long moment. Then he looked up, and Ylva watched a man she had shared a bed with for 2 months put on the face he had described to her on the gallery, smooth and easy and absolutely opaque, and say to the envoy, My wife is a healer and a tyrant about it. Forgive us. I am told the willow at Kelvarn is not what it was. Aldous laughed politely. The clerks laughed. The treaty went on for another hour. They met afterwards behind a shut door, 4 of them, and no clerks. The king, the envoy, the physician and Brannock as captain of the guard, with Ylva at the end of the table holding the cup. Wolfsbane, she said, ground fine, in a draught made up for the king by name. That is the 3rd attempt, and I am no longer asking, I am telling you. This is a house that wants him dead. The physician went gray. Aldous put his hands flat on the table and looked at them for a while. That word does not leave this room, Osric said. Not to a clerk, not to a wife, not to the man who sweeps the still room. 4 of us know what was in that cup, and it stays 4. They all agreed to it. Ylva agreed to it last. He came to her later in the muniment room with the door shut. Say it to the council, she said. Say it to the whole of Kelvarn. If I stand up in that chamber and say, A great house of High March has been trying to kill me for 4 years. Aldous gets on a horse tonight. Osric's voice was very level. There is no treaty with a kingdom whose houses poison their king. The war on the northern line starts again before the thaw, and I bought it once with 2 valleys, and do not have 2 more. Then the treaty is worth more than your life. Today, it is worth about 9,000 lives. So, yes. He took her hands. 2 days. Give me 2 days, and the ink is dry, and then I will burn House Callow to the foundations. I need you to say nothing and trust me, and I know exactly what I am asking. She looked at him and thought about the man on the gallery with his face coming off. All right, she said. I promise. She lasted 4 hours. She told herself afterwards that it was the shoulder, and it was not true, and she had known it on the first stare. What she had actually noticed was that he had left the treaty table and gone the wrong way. The muniment room door was open a hand's width, and there was a light in it. Osric was at her trestle. The rough book was open in front of him, 4 years of her own shorthand under his hand, and beside it a sheet she recognized from a whole winter away and half a room, because she had put it there herself under a candlestub and had never thought about it again. The Rowan Hall Depot form. The small, neat hand. Beside it he had laid out a second sheet, and on that one, in his own writing, there was a list of names. What are you doing with my book? Ilva said. He did not startle. He did not put anything down or turn anything over. He raised his head and looked at her with the face of a man who has run out of road. I have been trying all winter, Osric said, to find a way to tell you this. Tell me what? He did not answer at once, and that was how she knew it was going to be bad. Because in 5 months, she had never seen him need a moment to find a sentence. The depot at Coldreach has been raising the wastage allowance for 9 years. Not 9. And for 9 years, every one of the countersignatures has been the same hand. That is not possible. I sign the yard book. You sign the yard book. Somebody signs the depot form 4 days earlier at Coldreach, before the wagon leaves. He held it out. You told me it was an old form. It is dated 2 years ago. Look at the hand and tell me you do not know it. Ilva did not take it. She did not need to. She had seen that hand on every jar in the tincture room, and on a note in a parcel of straw, 3 weeks ago. My girl, do not neglect it. No, she said. She is not the head of it. Callow is, and she is the reason it was never caught. Because every complaint from Rowan Hall for 9 years has gone up through her and stopped there, including yours. Both your letters to the seneschal are in a drawer at Coldreach. They never reached Kelvarn. They were never meant to. The floor did something. You are wrong about her. Her voice came out strange. You do not know her. She pulls me out of a burned hold. She has never asked me for one thing in her life. Yes, she has, Osric said. She asked you to stay. Then he told her the rest. He had sent the jar to 2 physicians, not the palace man, 2 separately in different cities, so that neither would know what the other said. It was a suppressant, made from a root grown for 20 years in the physic garden at Rowan Hall, and it did one thing only, which was to shut down the scent glands of a wolf so completely that the wolf never surfaced at all. You are not scent blind, Osric said. You have never been. You have been dosed every month since you were 5 years old. Ilva heard a sound and understood after a moment that it had come out of her. On the gallery, he said. You had run out. It had worn thin, and for about an hour you were what you actually are. And I felt it, and you felt it, and you told me it was the tallow, and I let you, because I already knew, and could not think of one way to say this to you in a corridor at midwinter. Why? It was barely a word. Why would she? Because a scentless omega cannot be claimed, cannot be bonded, cannot inherit, and cannot be believed. She kept the cleverest ledger-keeper in High March, in a store cupboard, for 20 years, and did it so thoroughly that in the end, she did not have to keep the door shut. You did that yourself. And Ilva, standing in a cold room at the second bell, heard her own voice on a staircase in the dark. Nobody is owed wanting. That is simply what I am. It had not been hers. She had carried it in her mouth for 4 years, like a stone she had picked up herself, and somebody had put it there. Halvard, she said. There is a payment into the depot accounts 11 days before your claiming. I cannot prove what it was for. A pause. I can prove what it bought. Ilva put both hands flat on the trestle. 4 years of counting stones in a wall, and being an empty chair, every hour of it arranged, and the woman who arranged it had held her while she cried about it and told her to check her doors. Then the second thing arrived, and it was worse than the first. How long have you known? Osric closed his eyes. I suspected Rowan Hall before Nettlemore. The depot hand was the reason I came. I did not know it was her until the physicians wrote back. 3 days after Cold Reach. 3 days after Cold Reach. Ilva's arm still had the scar. You have known since before the snow. You sat in this room every evening all winter and let me go on taking it. I needed her to keep sending it. His voice cracked. For the first time since she had met him, she is the only living person who can put Callow at that depot. The moment she knows I have looked at that jar, she is a woman in a valley 4 days away, with a garden full of evidence and of fire. I have had 2 days. Ilva. 2 days. Since the treaty gave me room to move at all, you should have told me. You would not have believed me. Try me. I did, Osric said. On the gallery. You told me it was the tallow. It hit her like a slap, because it was not wrong, and being not wrong was the single most unforgivable thing about it. So you married me for the book, she said, and kept the rest back, because I was too stupid about her to be trusted with it, and in between the two, you took me to bed. That is not. It is precisely. She was crying, and did not care. Yvonne needed a girl who would never leave, and you needed a woman who could read her own shorthand, and both of you were kind to me while you did it, and I could not tell the difference. That is what you have taught me, Ilva. I put my body in front of a blade for you on that road. I know, and you came home and read my book. She got to the door and had to hold the frame. Do not follow me. There is a poisoner in this palace, he said, and his voice was in pieces. Ilva, please, I need you. She stopped in the doorway. She would remember later that he had said I need you, and had not said any of the other things, and that this was the entire trouble with him, and always had been. She walked out. She went down 2 flights and across the west yard in the freezing dark, and did not think about where she was going until she was nearly there. There is one person in the world who has never wanted anything from me. Yvonne had come up from Nettlemore for the feast and was lodged in the guest range above the stables. Ilva knocked on her door. My girl. The old woman took one look at her face and pulled her in out of the cold. Who has done this to you? And Ilva, who had had 10 minutes on a freezing staircase to think, sat down and let her mouth shake and said, it was all a lie. He married me for the ledgers. He has been using me since Nettlemore. There now. The hand came down over her hair, rough and steady, exactly as it had through every fever of her life, and Ilva sat under it and felt something in her chest go quietly and permanently cold. I knew, Yvonne said. Since the day that Ryder came into my yard, I hoped to spare you it. The old woman sat down opposite. And it is worse than you know. Your king has been dosing you. The room went very quiet. Ask yourself why a man marries a woman who cannot be claimed, and then keeps her within 4 walls with a book. A wolf with no scent cannot bond and cannot leave and cannot be believed. If she talks, Yvonne's face was full of grief. It is in a jar. It came from his still room. I saw the order myself, not 2 days since. Ilva sat absolutely still. She had taken that jar since she was 5 years old. She had taken it in a valley 4 days' ride away, through fevers, through the year she was 19, years before Osric was king of anything, and the last jar had arrived 3 weeks ago carried by the woman sitting in front of her. The whole of it went over like a wagon on ice. 2 days since, Ilva said. 2 days. You saw the order for it 2 days since. I did. Yvonne reached across and took her hands. My girl. The wolfsbane in that cup was never meant for him. Think, who was standing in that passage? Who took it off the tray? And there it was. 4 people had been told what was in that cup, in a shut room with no clerks, and nothing had gone out of that palace since. Yes, Ilva said slowly. I see. She made her face crumple, which took nothing at all, because the material was to hand. What do we do? Yevon's eyes sharpened, and it was the smallest change. And Ilva watched it happen and thought, quite clearly, I have never seen your real face, and I have known you my whole life. We go to the northern envoy, before the ink is dry. A king who poisons his own wife to keep her quiet is not a king any man puts his name beside. He will fall, and there are good houses ready to steady the realm, after House Callow among them, among others. But it cannot come from me, child. I am a hall healer from a valley. It has to come from the one person in that palace no man alive would suspect of lying about him. His wife, Ilva said. His wife. It was the longest walk of Ilva's life. Aldous had taken the small chamber off the council room, and Osric was in it, grey to the lips, with Brannock at the door, and half the treaty spread out. He looked up when Ilva came in behind Yvonne, and for half a second, his whole face opened. Then he saw who she had walked in with, and it closed. Majesty, said Yvonne, and bowed to the envoy. Forgive, an old woman. I have carried this a day, and I cannot carry it further. The Queen of Highmark has been poisoned in this house by her own husband, and I have the proof of it, and she will tell you so herself. Every face in the room turned. Aldous of the North leaned forward. The clerks stopped writing. Brannock's hand went to his belt and stayed there, and Osric looked at her across 9 feet of council chamber with the expression of a man watching the last thing go. Ilva stepped into the middle of the room. That is a lie, she said, and it is her lie, and I will tell you how I know. The room snapped tight as a bowstring. Yvonne did not move at all. I have taken that tonic every month since I was 5 years old, Ilva said to the envoy, because he was the only man in the room who mattered. It comes from Rowan Hall, in straw, sealed with candle wax, in the hand of the woman beside me. She has sent it for 18 years. The last jar arrived 3 weeks ago, and I can produce it, and the note in her own writing, and any apothecary in this city can tell you within the hour what is in it. Child, said Yvonne, she says the king ordered it 2 days ago. He was not king when I was 5. He was a boy in this palace working on his face. Somebody in the room let out a breath. And one thing more, which I would ask my Lord of the North to mark, because it is the only part that will stand up in a court. Ilva's voice had gone flat and level, the voice she used in a fever room. Tonight a draft was made up for the king with wolfsbane ground into it. 4 people were told what was in that cup. His Majesty, my Lord Aldous, the palace physician and the captain of the guard. It was said behind a shut door with no clerks. The still room was sealed within the hour, and no word of it has left this building. Ask her how she knew it was wolfsbane. Yevonne's mouth opened. She said it upstairs, not a quarter hour ago, in front of no one, Ilva said. I will swear to it, and she said it because she ground it. The old woman moved. Gee. She went for the satchel on the table with a speed nobody expected, and Ilva got there first because she had been watching those hands her entire life and knew what they would do a half-second before they did it. And Ilva, who had lifted grown men off the floor of a fever room for 4 years, took the satchel off her and put her down into a chair with one hand flat on her shoulder. The jar came out of it, straw-packed, candle wax. Search her rooms, said Aldous of the North, into a silence you could have stood a spoon in, and send for the House of Callow. They took her out. She did not fight, and she did not shout. At the door she looked back, and her face was full of a grief that was almost certainly real, which was somehow the worst thing in the night. I kept you safe, Yvonne said. You kept me small, said Ilva. You have had 20 years of me being grateful for it. That is the whole of what you get. Then the room emptied, the clerks going out backwards with their papers held to their chests, and it was the 2 of them. Osric had not moved. You saved my life, he said. After everything, you still. I came to stop a thief. her voice did not do anything at all. That is the whole of it, Ilva. He took one step. The bond is real. You felt it on the gallery. Whatever else I did, that was never. It does not matter whether it is real. She was so tired she could barely stand. You looked at me every evening all winter, and you knew what she had done to me, and you let me keep taking it. You may have had 9 good reasons. I expect you did. You have never once had a bad reason for anything, and that is exactly why I cannot be near you. I love you. Yes, Ilva said. I know. That is not the part that is broken. She got to the door. The contract says 1 year, she said, without turning round. I am taking the healing house. I will have it at Coldrich, where they were robbed. You will not visit, and you will not write. You said I might ask when you were lying. I never once asked. In 5 months. She put her hand on the latch. I cannot work out whether that was trust or cowardice, and until I know, I am no use to anybody. She walked out. Coldreach in the thaw was mud to the ankle, and the house they gave her had been a wool factor's warehouse and still smelled of it. She took it in March and had the roof on by May. Rena came north with 2 boxes and an opinion, and stayed. 4 Rowan Hall apprentices came after her, because Nettlemore had discovered in 1 month that everything it thought it knew had been arranged by a small dry woman it had never once looked at twice. Ilva did not go back for the trial. She sent her book. The rest she got in letters from Brannock, who wrote like a man filling in a form. Callow broken. Yvonne sentenced. 9 years of wastage allowance returned to the halls, which in Coldreach meant a new well, and a schoolroom and 40 bolts of wool arriving in a town that had stopped expecting them. He also wrote at the bottom of the 4th letter in the same flat hand, "The king is not well. That is not my business to say, B." Ilva put that letter in the fire and then sat and looked at the fire for an hour. Because the other thing about the spring was that her scent had come up and would not go down. Salt and rain and something like bruised mint. Rena cried when she first noticed. A man in the market turned his head and looked at her with plain interest, and Ilva went home and shook for an hour, because at 24 she was learning a language every wolf in Highmarch had spoken since they were 12, and she was learning it alone. And under her ribs, all day and all night, there was a thread. She kept it shut. That was a thing you could do, and it cost. Some nights it was only a warm ache behind the breastbone. Some nights she woke at the 3rd bell, with her eyes already streaming, and no dreams she could name, and knew perfectly well that 4 days' ride south, a man was awake too. She worked instead. Coldreach had built a whole way of living around being robbed, and half the arrangements it had made to cover the missing 3rd were themselves crooked, and Ilva spent that spring taking them apart with a pen. They hated her for 6 weeks. Then a consignment came in whole, for the first time in living memory, and the mood in that town turned over in a single afternoon. He did not write. She had told him not to, and he had not. And Ilva discovered she had been braced for a fight, and had got none at all, and somehow that was worse than letters. It was Rena who worked out the other thing. In May, standing in the door of the still room with a basket on her hip. "Ilva, how long since your courses?" Ilva stood very still in the middle of a room full of hanging bark. She had never been able to conceive. Everyone had always said so. An omega with no wolf and no scent and no bond could not carry. It was one of the kind things they said at the east wall, while the line moved past. She had never had a reason to count anything of the sort. But she had had a scent since March, and a wolf since March, and a bond since a gallery at midwinter. She sat down on the stool by the drying frames, and counted it twice, with hands that would not keep still. Rena put the basket down and crouched in front of her and said nothing at all, which was the single most useful thing anybody had done for her in 6 months. "I cannot tell him," Ilva said at last. "No, he would come." "Yes," said Rena. "He would come this same day." Ilva looked at her hands, which had stopped shaking, and had gone instead to lying quite still in her lap, and understood that some part of her had known for a fortnight and had been waiting for somebody else to say it out loud. "Then we had better get the roof on," she said. 4 years later, the road into Coldreach had a sign on it, and the sign said the North House, and under that, in smaller letters, because Rena had insisted and Ilva had lost the argument. Ilva of Coldreach, hallkeeper, not queen. She never used it. The North House took 40 apprentices a year by then, and turned away 300. It had a fever wing, a bone room, a physic garden, that supplied 9 towns, and a rule written above the door in the hand of a woman who kept books, that every consignment in and out was to be counted twice by 2 people and read aloud. Half the halls in High March had copied it, 4 other houses ran on the same pattern, and not one coin had ever gone missing out of any of them. That was not an accident. The boy was called Senate, and he had his father's pale winter eyes, and his mother's total inability to leave a thing alone until it made sense. Osric had come the first time when Senate was 11 days old. He had sent no warning. He had ridden 4 days and stood in the yard of a half-built warehouse in the rain, and had not come 1 step closer than the gate, and when Ilva came out with a bundle in her arms, he had gone the color of the sky. "I am not here for you," he had said. "Brannock told me, I will go if you want me gone. I did not want him to be a thing I was told about in a letter." He came the 2nd Tuesday of every month after that for 4 years. He never came unannounced again, and never wrote a word to her that was not about the boy or the houses, or a pension case he wanted her honest opinion on. He came in the morning, and left before dark, and sat on the floor of the fever wing with a 3-year-old explaining the parts of a scale to him with enormous seriousness, and he did not once ask her for anything. Nuttlemore sent its first apprentice to the North House in the 2nd year. Ilva read the letter 3 times before she believed it. The valley that had arranged her, that had stood along a wall and pitied her, was asking whether their girls might come north and be taught. She took 4, and 4 more the next year. And in the 3rd year, Quaira Callow came up the north road on a hired cart with her hands empty, out of a holding in the south with her house broken and her son gone to sea, and asked, in a voice with nothing left in it, whether the queen would see her. Ilva saw her. Everyone in the house found a reason to be in that passage. "My hip," Quaira said. "There is nobody left who will look at it." And Ilva of Coldreach, who had counted the stones in a wall at 19, while this woman explained to a third of a pack that she was a cruelty of the gods, took her into the bone room and looked at her hip and did not say one single thing about any of it, then or ever. That went all the way down the valley in about a fortnight. The way those things do, something had changed in the pack, and not all at once. In the 1st year, they talked about her as a scandal. In the 2nd, as a curiosity. By the 4th, mothers in Nettlemore were saying it to their daughters as a plain instruction. "Learn your letters. Count what comes in the gate. Look at what happened to that girl they all felt sorry for." She heard it properly in the 4th spring in a market at Nettlemore, behind 2 women who did not know she was there. One was complaining about a wool merchant, and the other said, "Count it in front of him, and write it down and read it back. That is what they do at the North House." And the first said, "Yes, all right," and that was the whole of it. Nobody mentioned the queen, nobody mentioned the girl at the east wall. 2 women had absorbed a way of doing things and were using it on a wool merchant, and Ilva walked back to her cart and had to sit in it for a while. Pity is a thing people hand you. Respect is a thing they use when you are not in the room. In the 4th year, on the 2nd Tuesday of September, Osric sat on the step of the North House with his son asleep against his shoulder, and said, without any warning at all, "I am going to stop coming on Tuesdays." Ilva's hands stopped. "Not from him," he said quickly. "Never from him. I mean the rest of it, the waiting. I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." He looked out at the yard. 4 years. And every one of those times, I have got on the horse afterwards, and thought perhaps At the gate, she will say something. That is not fair to you. You should be able to hand me my son in your own yard without a man standing in it hoping. He shifted the boy carefully. So, I am going to stop. I wanted to say it out loud rather than simply do it, because you once told me the worst thing anyone can do is be kind at you without saying what they mean. He handed her the sleeping child and got on his horse and rode south. And Ylva stood in her own yard, in the best thing she had ever built, and found that she could not get her breath. The rite of standing at Nettlemore is held in the second week of October, and has been for 200 years, and everybody in the valley knows the order of it. The unclaimed stand along the east wall. And then it is done. And there is a supper. And the ones who were passed over go home and do not talk about it. That year, there were 7 of them, and it was raining, and the marshal was halfway down the line when the door at the back opened. Ylva had not set foot in that building since the night she was married on its back steps. She had come south to see the roof go on the schoolroom, and had had no intention of going near the meeting hall. Rena had made her, with a lack of subtlety, 4 years in the making, and Ylva had put on a dark green coat and come in out of the rain expecting nothing but a bad hour. The hall went quiet in the way halls do. She saw Halvard Callow's cousin near the door, and watched him find somewhere else to look. Old Tommen, who had once nodded at her the way he nodded at furniture, got up off his bench, which at 81 took him some doing. And at the far end of the east wall, at the end of the line of the unclaimed, in a plain coat, with the reins still on his shoulders, and no crown and no guard, and Brannock by the door, with his eyes shut in the manner of a soldier who has raised the matter formally and been overruled, stood the Alpha King of Highmarch. Nobody in that hall was breathing. He had been there, Ylva learned later, since the beginning of the rite. He had taken his place at the end of the line, the way any unclaimed wolf in that valley takes his place. And the marshal had said, "Majesty, you cannot." And Osric had said, "I am told the line is open to any wolf of the pack. Am I a wolf of the pack?" The marshal had had no answer for that at all, so the pack of Nettlemore had filed past their king, one at a time, for an hour, and not one of them had dared claim him, and he had stood there and let them look. Ylva walked down the hall. She could hear her own boots. She stopped in front of him, and he did not say anything, and she saw that his hands were shaking. "You said you were going to stop," she said. "I said I would stop waiting at your gate. I have." His voice was not steady either. "I am standing at a wall in a valley where they all watched what they did to you, where every one of them can see, because there is exactly one thing in this kingdom I have never done properly, and it is this." He swallowed. "You were made to stand here 3 years running so that people could decide about you. I thought it was time somebody stood here and let you decide about me. You are the king." "Yes, and it took me 8 years to work out that this is the only room in Highmarch where that is worth nothing at all." Somewhere behind her somebody's chair went over. "I have nothing to offer you that you have not already built better yourself," Osric said. "You have your house, and your name, and your son. And the whole of the north thinks you hung the moon, and I have watched you do all of it from 4 days' ride away and have never been prouder of anything in my life. So there is no use for me. That is rather the point. I have not come here to be of use to you." He looked at her. "I have come to be chosen, if you want me. And if you do not, I will go home, and it will be the last time I ever ask, and I will still be there on any Tuesday you name for the rest of my life." Ylva stood in the middle of the meeting hall at Nettlemore, with 200 people holding their breath. She thought about a staircase in the dark, and a man who had married her in 4 minutes because it was the fastest protection he had, and a jar in straw, and a whole winter of a good reason. Then she opened the bond. It hit her like a door blown open in a storm. 4 years of it, at once, unguarded, no face on it, at all. The waiting, the Tuesdays, the gate. And under it, so plain, it was almost childish, a thing she had never felt from anybody in her life, which was somebody hoping to be picked. Osric made a sound and put his hand out against the wall. "You have been keeping that shut for 4 years," she said. "So have you." "Yes." Her eyes were streaming. "I am the most stubborn woman in the north. You may ask anyone." She reached up and put her hand along the side of his face. In front of the whole pack, in the hall where they had stood her against a wall and moved past her 3 years running. "I take Osric of Highmarch," Ylva said, loudly enough for the 4 nearest families. "To husband, here, before my pack, in the sight of every one of you. Say it back to me so there is no confusion later." The silence went on a beat too long. And then old Toman, 81 and still on his feet, said, "Witnessed," in a voice like a gate hinge. "Witnessed," said the Marshal of Nettlemore, who had had a very difficult evening. And then the rest of them, all down the hall and out into the rain, ragged and delighted, and one after another, "Witnessed, witnessed, witnessed." Because a claiming given before the pack is the one thing in Highmarks that cannot afterwards be taken back, and every wolf in that room knew it. Osric was laughing. He was also crying, in front of 200 people, which Ylva had privately expected and had put no money on, out of respect. "You might have warned me," she said into his coat. "You would have written me a list of reasons." "I would have written you an excellent list of reasons." "I know," said the King of Highmarch. "I have kept every one you ever sent me." They did it properly, in the spring, at Coldreach, because Ylva refused point-blank to be married in the capital. Senate was for and carried nothing and dropped it anyway. The daughters came after. Marit first, born in the North House, with Rena swearing at everybody, and Belle 2 years behind her, who arrived on a Tuesday, which the whole valley found extremely funny for approximately a decade. Senate grew up counting things. He took the North House at 26 and ran it better than his mother, which she said out loud, in front of people, on the day she handed it over. Mairead went for the law and prosecuted exactly one kind of crime her whole working life. Belle went to sea, learned nothing useful, and was everybody's favorite. And the pack of Nettlemore, which had once stood a scentless girl against a wall, and felt sorry for her for 4 years, spent the next 30 telling the story to its children slightly wrong, the way packs do. In their version, she had always been extraordinary, and they had always known it. There was no line and no wall, and nobody had ever said a word about a cruelty of the gods. Ylva never corrected them. Osric wanted to. She would not let him. "Let them keep it," she said. "It is a better story than the true one, and the true one is mine." Late one evening, in their 12th year, with the house asleep and the ledgers finally shut, he said, "You know that I got the better end of this, obviously. I put a claim on you in front of 400 people, because it was the fastest thing I could think of, and I have spent my entire life earning it backwards." "Yes," said Ylva, "and you may go on doing it. There is no taking it back." It was witnessed.